She wasn't born into royalty. She had no riches, no armies, and no power. Esther was just an orphan, raised in exile, a foreign girl living under the rule of the world's most powerful empire. Yet she was chosen not by chance, and not by beauty alone. She was placed by divine purpose, hidden behind palace walls for such a time as this. In the days of King Xerxes, who ruled over 127 provinces from India to Ethiopia, his power stretched across the known world. From his throne in the citadel of Susa, he reigned with absolute authority. To show his greatness, Xerxes held a lavish feast for 180 days, inviting nobles, princes, and military leaders from every province. Golden goblets overflowed with wine, and the palace glistened with luxury. When those 6 months ended, the king opened the palace gates to everyone in Susa, hosting a 7-day banquet in the royal gardens. Wine was served without restraint, and the people feasted beneath the shade of fine linen and marble columns. Meanwhile, Queen Vashti held a banquet of her own for the women of the palace. But on the 7th day, when the king's heart was merry with wine, he commanded Queen Vashti to appear before the guests, wearing her royal crown so that all might admire her beauty. Vashti refused. She would not parade herself before a drunken crowd. The king's pride was wounded, his anger burned, and his advisors feared her defiance would spread. They urged him to remove her crown and issue a decree that every man should rule his own household. Xerxes agreed, and Vashti was banished. But God's hand was already at work. As time passed and the king's anger faded, he grew lonely. His advisors suggested a search be made for a new queen. Messengers traveled to every province, gathering young women for the palace. Among them was Hadassah, known by her Persian name Esther, a young Jewish orphan raised by her cousin Mordecai. She was taken into the king's harem, placed under the care of Haggai, the keeper of the women. Esther asked for nothing more than what was given to her. She was gentle, humble, and wise. God gave her favor in everyone's eyes. For 12 months, the women were prepared with oils and perfumes before being presented to the king. When Esther's time came, she entered Xerxes' presence with quiet dignity. The king was captivated. He loved Esther more than all the others, and he placed the royal crown upon her head, making her queen in place of Vashti. A banquet was held in her honor, and gifts were sent throughout the empire. But no one knew her secret that she was a Jew. Meanwhile, Mordecai spent his days at the king's gate. One day, he overheard 2 of the king's guards plotting to assassinate Xerxes. Mordecai quickly warned Esther, and she told the king in his name. The matter was investigated, the conspirators were found guilty, and the king's life was saved. The event was recorded in the royal chronicles, but Mordecai was not rewarded. His name was quietly written in a book, waiting for the right time. Not long after, the king promoted Haman, a proud Agagite, to the highest rank among his officials. All were commanded to bow before him, but Mordecai refused. Enraged, Haman plotted not only to destroy Mordecai, but to annihilate all the Jews in the empire. Casting lots, he fixed the date. He persuaded the king with deceitful words, and a royal decree went out. On the 13th day of the 12th month, every Jew was to be destroyed. Across the land, mourning spread, and the Jews wept in despair. When Mordecai heard the decree, he tore his clothes, covered himself in sackcloth and ashes, and cried out in the streets. Esther sent a messenger to ask why, and through him, Mordecai urged her to go to the king and plead for her people. But Esther hesitated. To approach the king uninvited meant death, unless he extended his golden scepter. She had not been called for 30 days. Mordecai's reply was stern and full of faith. "Do not think that you will escape in the palace. If you remain silent, deliverance will come from elsewhere, but you and your family will perish. And who knows? Perhaps you have come to your royal position for such a time as this." Esther's fear gave way to courage. She answered, "Go, gather all the Jews in Susa. Fast for me for 3 days. I will go to the king. If I perish, I perish." On the 3rd day, Esther dressed in her royal robes and stood in the inner court of the palace. The king saw her and extended the golden scepter. She approached with reverence. Xerxes asked her what she desired, offering even half the kingdom. Esther replied, "If it pleases the king, come with Haman to a banquet I have prepared." At the banquet, the king again asked for her request, but Esther waited. She invited them both to return the next day. That night, Xerxes could not sleep. He ordered the chronicles to be read aloud. There he discovered the record of Mordecai saving his life. Shocked that nothing had been done to honor him, he asked his officials what reward should be given. At that very moment, Haman entered, intending to ask permission to execute Mordecai. But before he could speak, the king asked, "What should be done for the man the king delights to honor?" Thinking of himself, Haman described robes, a royal horse, and a public procession. To his horror, the king commanded, "Do everything you have said, for Mordecai the Jew." Haman was forced to lead Mordecai through the streets, proclaiming his honor. Humiliated, his spirit was crushed. The next day, at Esther's second banquet, the king asked again, "What is your request?" With steady voice, Esther replied, "Grant me my life and spare my people. We have been sold to be destroyed and annihilated." The king demanded, "Who would dare do such a thing?" Esther pointed, "The adversary is this wicked Haman." Enraged, the king left the room. Haman, trembling, fell at Esther's couch to beg for mercy. At that moment, the king returned and saw him clinging to her. "Will he even assault the queen in my own house?" Guards seized him, and Haman was hanged on the very gallows he had prepared for Mordecai. The king gave Haman's estate to Esther, and Mordecai received the royal signet ring. Yet the decree against the Jews still remained, for no Persian law could be revoked. So Esther pleaded again, and the king allowed a new decree, that the Jews could assemble and defend themselves. On the appointed day, they stood united. From Susa to the farthest provinces, they struck down their enemies. They took no plunder, only defended their lives. In the capital, even Haman's 10 sons were defeated. What began as a day of dread became a day of victory. To remember, the Jews established a yearly festival called Purim, named after the lots Haman had cast. Each year they feasted, rejoiced, sent gifts, and gave to the poor. Mourning had turned into joy. Mordecai was clothed in royal blue and white, honored throughout the empire, second only to the king. But what made him great was not power, but his heart seeking the good of his people and speaking peace. Though God's name is never mentioned in the book of Esther, his fingerprints are everywhere in every risk, every twist, every rescue. What was meant for destruction, he turned into salvation. And the story of Esther reminds us, even when God seems silent, he is never absent. Even when the odds are against us, he is already at work. Perhaps you too are where you are for such a time as this. Not by accident, not unseen, but chosen, positioned, and called.